Hello, greetings, and good day to everybody. So for this lesson, I'll be giving you an introduction to general physiology. Now I guess it is fitting for us to first define what physiology is. Now physiology in biology is defined as the branch of biology that deals with the functions of the parts. Or in short, this is the study of how living things work. Or we can say that physiology studies the physiological mechanisms that control and coordinate the function of various systems within the organism. Alright, this is in contrast with anatomy. When we speak of anatomy, anatomy deals with the structure of the organism. But in physiology, we deal with the structure and functions of the different parts of an organism. And again, what do physiologists study? So basically, they study the structure and function of various parts and how these parts work together. And this is quite a huge task when one considers the diversity of living things, because we know that there are millions of different species living on this planet alone. Now, like what I have mentioned a while ago, our physiologists, they study the structure and the function of the different parts of an organism and how these parts work together. Now, with their studies, our physiologists basically would bring together everything that they know about an organism's function in order to create an integrated picture of how that organism operates in its environment. Now, one good example of this are the researches into cetacean reproduction. So eventually, these researches would lead to procedures such as artificial insemination, because we know for a fact that cetaceans like whales and dolphins, they are somewhat endangered, and through artificial insemination, in a way, this would help save their species. Now, probably the next question that we need to answer is, why do we need to study physiology? Now, there are several reasons why we need to study physiology. And one important reason is basic research. Basic research in physiology is the foundation upon which builds our knowledge of what life is, and how to treat diseases, and how to cope with stresses imposed upon our bodies by different environments. So basic research is vital so that we can understand more of ourselves. So that's one reason why we need to study physiology. Another reason why we need to study physiology is in the field of agriculture and veterinary care. So the study of crop physiology is important in order to regulate plant diseases and other physiological disturbances. And the study of agricultural and veterinary care in relation to physiology is that it will also help in the improvement of crop production and the quality of food. And lastly, another reason why we need to study physiology is that physiology, as it applies to the human body, is the cornerstone of medical practice. So if you want to become doctors in the future, you really need to study how our body works. So physiology, as it applies to the human body, is the cornerstone of the medical profession. Now, at this point, let us now study a brief history of the development of modern physiology. And one of the earliest scientists, philosophers who dealt with physiology was Aristotle. Now, Aristotle studied biological processes, namely metabolism, temperature regulation, information processing, embryogenesis, and inheritance. Each was defined in some detail and in some cases sufficient to enable modern biologists to create a mathematical model or mathematical models of the mechanisms described. So isn't that fascinating? No? And Aristotle's method resembled the style of science used by modern biologists when exploring a new area with systematic data collection, discovery of patterns, and inference of possible causal explanations from those mentioned. Alright, so that's the contribution of Aristotle in the development of modern physiology. Then also we have to consider also the contribution of Hippocrates. Now Hippocrates was dubbed as the father of medicine. So Hippocrates basically separated religion from curing diseases because we are all aware that during the time of the ancient Greeks, when a person gets sick, they considered the evil spirits as the main cause of the disease or illness. Now, Hippocrates changed all that. So he believed that when a person gets sick, it's because of certain factors in the environment and not from evil spirits. So Hippocrates separated superstition from the curing of diseases. That's why he was named as the father of medicine. Then also we have the contribution of Claudius Galenus, or popularly known as Galen. So Galen was a Greek physician, but he transferred to Rome to make a name for himself. And when in Rome, he applied as the physician to the gladiators. Now Galen was quite interested in anatomy and dissections. So he used the cadavers of dead gladiators or wounded gladiators to meticulously observe what is inside the body. So he made use of those dead gladiators to dissect, and meticulous observations were made by Galen in order to study what is inside the human body. So that was Galen. Galen took the advantage of becoming the physician to the gladiators so that he can get access to the cadavers of the gladiators or wounded soldiers and make his own dissection so that he could learn more about what is inside the human body. So Galen made and had combined the philosophical works of Aristotle and the other Greek physicians with his own lifetime of dissections. And eventually Galen created a system that explained not just the structure of the human body but how the body worked. But unfortunately, Galen cannot make accurate drawings or accurate illustrations of his own observations. So most of his work and writings were quite erroneous. There were many mistakes in the observations made by Galen. But still, Galen's legacy lived on until this guy by the name of Andreas Vesalius came into the picture. Now, Andreas Vesalius realized that Galen was dramatically wrong. And as he grew more familiar with the human body, Vesalius began to notice that there are certain mistakes made by Galen. Like for example, the human breastbone is made of 3 segments. According to Galen, it was 7, but according to Vesalius, there were only 3 segments. Also, Galen claimed that the humerus or the upper arm bone was the longest bone, wherein in fact according to Vesalius, it's the femur. Now the femur is the longest bone in the human body. So there were many mistakes in Galen's observations. And eventually Vesalius came up with a book entitled On the Structure of the Human Body, correcting Galen. Now another physician who contributed to the development of modern physiology was William Harvey. And probably the greatest achievement of William Harvey was to recognize that the blood flow rapidly around the human body being pumped by the heart through a single system of arteries and veins. So he recognized the role of the heart as the pumping organ. And also to support this hypothesis about the circulation of blood, he conducted experiments and conducted arguments to support such idea. And because of this, William Harvey was named as the father of modern physiology. Then also we had the contributions of Hermann Boerhaave and Albrecht von Haller. Now Boerhaave and von Haller realized that bodily functions are a combination of chemical and physical processes, that the connection between nerve impulse and muscular contraction must be considered. And lastly, another physician who made significant contributions in the development of modern physiology was Claude Bernard. Now, Claude Bernard gave us the concept of homeostasis or steady state or the maintenance of balance. And he also realized the role of hemoglobin as a carrier of oxygen. And he was a strong advocate of animal research. That was the legacy of Claude Bernard. Now, at this point, let us now tackle the central themes in modern physiology. Now, there are several central themes in our study of physiology. Number one, all bodily processes obey the laws of physics and chemistry. Number two, all bodily processes are regulated to maintain homeostatic balance. And the third central theme is that an organism's express physiology is the product of evolution. So at this point, let's take a look at central theme number one, which is all physiological and bodily processes obey the laws of physics and chemistry. Now, what's the implication of central theme number one? Now, to put it simply, all animal and plant adaptations can be understood by referring to a manageable number of concepts and principles. Now, to explain central theme number one, let's take a look at the elephant and some of the adaptations exhibited by the elephant. Now, if you will look closely, the elephant has a prehensile trunk. The elephant's trunk is prehensile, which means that it can grab onto objects. And did you know that they can pick up a blade of grass with their trunks? So that's one adaptation of the elephant, having a prehensile trunk. This trunk can grab onto objects. Now, another adaptation exhibited by the elephant are its ears. The elephant's ears are huge, and that's because they contain a lot of large veins. When the elephant gets hot, the blood flows to their ears and they fan them to cool the blood. So basically, the elephant's ears are like biological radiators in order to regulate body temperature. So isn't that quite fascinating? That the elephant's ears, they act as biological radiators. Also, most African elephants have tusks, yung parang sungay, but not the females. It's only the males that exhibit tusks but not the females. Males use them to fight and to use them as tools to move things. So that's another adaptation of the male elephant having those tusks. And also, elephants usually walk on their tiptoes. The foot has a cushion-like pad which helps support the weight of the elephant. Their foot pads and toenails are made of the same thing as fingernails are made of so-called keratin. So those are some of the adaptations of the elephant. Also, in relation to central theme number one, The biological materials such as proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids, they determine what form and function may be found in living systems. So in physiology, we have a saying that structure dictates function. And may I repeat that? Structure dictates function. Engineering concepts such as flow, pressure, resistance, and stress may also be related to this central theme. And anatomical structures is linked to physics principles such as work, mechanical advantage, and laws of kinetics. And again, let me reiterate that statement that the structure of the organism dictates its function. An understanding of animal and plant physiology requires a knowledge of physics, which explains electrical currents, blood pressure, the way muscles uses bone for movement. And one good example to illustrate this would be how a submarine works. And we will relate this to biological concepts. So the explanation of how fishes control their buoyancy underwater can also be related to the principle of how the submarine works. Now, a typical submarine is equipped with ballast tanks. Now, if the ballast tanks are filled with air, then the buoyant force of the water is greater than the weight of the submarine. So therefore, the submarine floats on water. Now, if the ballast tanks are filled with water, then the buoyant force decreases, the weight of the submarine increases, so therefore the submarine dives or submerges underwater. Now, we can relate this to how fishes control or regulate their buoyancy underwater. Now, fishes, especially those under class Ostiches or the bony fishes, are equipped with swim bladders. Now, these swim bladders can be filled with air or water that will eventually regulate their buoyancy, similar to that of a submarine. So this is how we connect physics principles with biological processes, like how fishes control their buoyancy underwater. Now, another example to illustrate central theme number 1 and correlating this with the statement that the structure of the organism dictates its function would be the movement of the frog's legs. The movement of the frog's leg is the end result of biochemical interactions between thousands of rod-like structures composed of the contractile proteins actin and myosin within each muscle cell. So we know for a fact that a typical muscle cell is composed of these microfilaments actin and myosin. And the biochemical interactions between actin and myosin will lead to muscle contraction. Another example of central theme number 1 following the laws of physics would be the transmission of nerve impulses. Now, the transmission of nerve impulses follows Ohm's law. Now, in the Ohm's law, the potential difference or voltage across an ideal conductor is proportional to the current through it. And this is the cornerstone of understanding active transport and storage of biological potential energy, which will lead to the transmission of nerve impulses across nerve fibers. So the ability of nerve cells, nerve fibers to transmit, to conduct electrical impulses can be explained through physics principles such as Ohm's law. Also, in relation to central theme number 1, physiological patterns are also influenced by body size. Volume increases faster than the surface area, and this will affect the following: the ability to transport needed materials like oxygen and even food materials. And as the volume increases faster than surface area, this will affect the ability to remove metabolic heat. And this influences the body size on the biochemical and physical patterns is known as allometric scaling. Now, to give you an idea of what allometric scaling is, allometric scaling in its broadest sense describes how the characteristics of living creatures change with size. The term originally referred to the scaling relationship between the size of a body part and the size of the body as a whole as both growth during development. So again, to put it simply, as the body gets larger, in general, the heart beats more slowly, brain gets bigger, bones get proportionally shorter and thinner, and the lifespan of the organism lengthens. So I hope everything is clear about the central theme number 1, that the structure of a body part is related to its function following the laws of physics and chemistry. So with that, let us now proceed to central theme number 2. Now, central theme number 2 is somewhat related to the maintenance of balance or homeostasis. Central theme number 2 refers to feedback loops maintain homeostatic balance. Now, there are two types of feedback loops. We have the negative feedback loop and positive feedback loop. Now, negative feedback refers to the signal that reduces the intensity of the stimulus and eventually returns the body to normalcy or to a favorable set point. Now, one good example of a negative feedback loop would be the maintenance of body temperature by the skin. Now, as the body warms or if the temperature outside is higher, then the body produces sweat. Sweating acts to cool the body down. And shivering also controls body temperature. Shivering acts to warm the body. Now, another example of a negative feedback loop would be the so-called hot water bath. Now, as you could see in this illustration, you have cold water and submerged in that cold water is a metal coil that is sensitive to changes in temperature. Now, since the water is cold, the metal coil starts to wind up. And eventually, this winding movement of the metal coil closes the contact and eventually electricity flows and the water is heated by the heater. So this is a negative feedback loop. The stimulus is cold and the signal reduces the intensity of the cold. And as the water warms, the metal coil unwinds, breaking the contact, electricity stops flowing, and eventually the water starts to cool down. So that's an example of a negative feedback loop. Now, what about positive feedback loop? Now, in the positive feedback loop, stimulus signals an increase in the intensity of the stimulus, resulting in an explosive event. Like for example, when a toxin is detected, there are forceful contractions of the muscles and eventually that will lead to vomiting. Another example would be birth contractions and heart attack. And lastly, we have central theme number 3. Central theme number 3 is all about physiology related to evolution. It was the evolution of physiological systems that maintained homeostasis. And this maintenance of homeostasis through evolution allowed organisms to survive, reproduce, and move into physiologically unfriendly environments. So anyway, we will have a detailed discussion about physiology and its relationship to evolution. So before we end with this lecture on the introduction to physiology, allow me now to state some important disciplines under physiology. So first, we have developmental physiology that deals with the question how do systems and structures change as the organism grows. Then we have environmental physiology that answers the question, what is the adaptive physiology that enables organisms like dolphins to live in the ocean? Then we have evolutionary physiology that answers the question, what is the origin and history of the physiological trait? Like, do organisms use a similar mechanism to maintain body temperature? This may be more important than similarities in body features. So those are just some of the important disciplines under physiology. Well, I guess that's about it for the introduction to general physiology. So I hope you have learned a lot, and please stay tuned for more of these lessons on general physiology. So long for now, and always stay safe. Bye-bye!